Can everybody see the slide in presentation mode?
Yep.
Great.
Yep.
Thanks very much. Well, welcome. It's our second forum. B-Spec is always a good test for us to make sure that everything's going and we get our process in order. Kelly and Natalie and Gaby and Kim and I have been busy making sure that we can deliver to you a really informative session. If at any time you experience that it's not, that it's missing the mark for you, don't hesitate to put something in the chat. Whilst we have a presentation, we also have some ability to vary the content. So on the bottom left-hand side of this slide, you'll see a head with a couple of cogs in it. So whenever that comes up on the slide, that means that we're going to be running a poll. So we've already had the first 3 polls from Kelly, and so that's what you can experience. If you will endeavour to address your technical issues, but we're not experts with Teams, and it may be a configuration from your end or your organisation's end that may prevent you accessing some of the features. But we'll do our best to support you where we can. So this is what you can expect today, and 5 sessions. Basically, you've just been, if you came in early, you've been experiencing the networking session, and you'll note that we talk about everything but work. And look, and it's a great opportunity just to experience getting connected with other people and talking about things that you may not necessarily talk about when you attend a webinar. This is not your typical webinar presentation. We like to see who's on. We like to hear from you. We love the interaction during the forums. And whilst we're doing our presentations, whilst we're going through the slides, if you have a question, put it into the chat. Actually, I'll move on to the next slide. Right, so put it into the chat. If you, rather than use, we noticed there that we've put the live Q&A. Yes, we've got live Q&A. It doesn't necessarily mean you need to go into the Q&A box, access it in the chat, or put it into, if you're having troubles with the chat, send an email to info@gisa.com.au, and I will endeavour to pick that up. If we don't pick it up straight away, we'll pick it up during the different conversations. So just some housekeeping. If you need to keep your phone on, no problem. Please keep it on silent, and do what you need to do to look after your affairs during the day. As Kelly showed you earlier, and I've mentioned, we've got live polling, so that will come up as we go along. In this session that I'll be running, I'll be talking about clarifications and interpretations, whether there's been expansion or reduction, and something that we haven't really added before is future proofing. And it's looking at speculating at what is needed and wanted, and some of the things that we're putting into the specs that will lead to future proofing the specs. Particularly with everything going on with digital engineering, digital twins space, it's really important that the specifications and A-SPEC remain relevant to that environment. I want to start off with governance, and we're dealing with governance in a number of ways. first off, we are dealing with the asset and asset handover process. Now, the intention is to include this document as part of the project assessment phase for the deliverables. And I want you to note, this is the asset and asset data handover checklist, not just the asset handover checklist. We created this form last year and a number of organizations have requested it. We use it for our own purposes. When people ask us to carry out some data capture on their behalf, we send them this form so that we know exactly what they expect to receive from us when they send us the drawings to create the live data. Now, I've noticed that Kelly has just shot off, so I'm going to see if I can launch.
I'm here, George. I've just launched the poll.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kelly. Yep, so there's a poll there that we're asking you if this would make it easier to address the handover requirements. We assert that it would, and it's quite an extensive list. And the document is a standalone document. It's been placed on the website under the proposed changes tab, and also the sorry, I'm just monitoring a couple of the chats, and also it's part of the A-SPEC overview document, which is a companion document to all of the specifications. You will only see an extract of this in the actual D-Spec document. The full list resides in the A-SPEC document, and there's the full list extracted into a separate document that sits on the website. How are you going with the poll, Kelly? That hasn't popped up for me.
Well, it's open. It's in the chat, and we've got quite a few responses, and
okay, great.
Majority are yes for the checklist.
Okay, cool. Thank you. By now, some of you may be familiar that we have two versions of the same document: the existing assets document and the new assets document. They are completely aligned, and what I'm going to do over the next couple of slides is just indicate to you what you can expect with the different documents. The main difference between the two documents is that for existing assets, and that could be for where you undertake projects to do retrospective data capture or doing some backlog data capture, we've gone through and we've looked at every single attribute and we've categorized it as to whether it's deemed to be a core requirement, a desired requirement, as in YR, and an optional requirement. And how this looks like can be seen over the next couple of slides. So, for example, for new assets, if we look at an extract of the PIT table, here's the look and feel of it. The majority of you will be familiar with this. When looking at the specification for existing assets, there is an extra column that's been added. And in the column on the right-hand side, in this particular example, you can see that all of those fields are required. And we've worked on the basis that that information can be found in the field. There are going to be instances where it's it's classified as YR, required and may need more research. And following the research, you may find that you can't find any further information, in which case you would put in a default value. And that would satisfy that particular requirement. But again, it's really a case-by-case scenario. The intention is to gather as much information as possible to meet the structured environment that you've created, utilizing A-SPEC as the basis of your inventory attribute fields for your assets. I've got a few slides talking about data governance. This is really important, and this one is about consistency. There's a number of instances where we've been approached to moderate conversations between asset owners and consultants who have delivered the data. Sometimes there's a request for assets not to be delivered. Other times there's requests for assets to be processed in a particular way, segmented in a particular way, or some variation to that. The thing that I want to talk about is the impact. And what needs to be considered is the impact to the surveyor or the company that is delivering that data and their client. And really what we're talking about is the impact on their workflows, the impact on their timelines, and the impact on their profitability. Our position, as we've outlined in this slide, is that there is an agreement amongst the community of what's required in each specification. Quite a lot of work has gone into that, and it's ongoing work. And as a result of that, everybody knows what is expected as a deliverable. And doesn't mean that all the deliverables are provided every single time. Not necessarily, but there is a document that creates the requirements that can be followed. And I'm always happy to have a conversation with people to clarify their interpretation, or if there's some ambiguity that we've created by the way that we put the requirement together. Always happy to do that. In terms of variations for what is required, our suggestion and recommendation is that the asset owners undertake a post-processing exercise once they receive the data. If you don't want to take up all of the attributes, or you don't want to take up all of the assets, that's okay. That decision can be made at your end. And if you need some support with putting a process in place, please don't hesitate to reach out to Gaby. And he'd be happy to have a talk to you about what your current environment is and how you can address that. And actually, I just realized that whilst I mentioned all these names about who's in our team, if this is your first time, then Kelly Ireland is our moderator of all of our forums. You can see she's always smiling. She's always got a great hairdo, and she's always on holidays. So, that's what we can expect. It's lovely. She's got a good work-life balance. Natalie Northey is recently come onto our team and is in the background. She's in and out of our forums. And previously, you may have dealt with Margaret. Margaret is still with us, but she's transitioning out of our business. I can't let her go just yet, despite her desire to want to leave. And we also have another colleague, Kim Hesse, who also supports us in the back end with our social media. So we've got a pretty good team that is out to support this community. There's quite a lot of talk around capturing other authorities' assets. And look, and there's some cons and pros to that. Our position and my experience has been that there is a risk in capturing other authorities' assets. And I've listed some of those on this slide for your consideration. If there is a requirement and an ongoing requirement to know where other authorities' assets are, then we strongly recommend that you get into communication with the authority and enter into a data exchange program. It may be that they could utilize the information that you have about the location of your assets and information about your assets and vice versa. And you can also discuss things about the frequency of the updates and what the data can be used for and cannot be used for. This is a new area that we've incorporated, again, under the data governance guidance. We discussed this last year. We brought it to the attention of what is proposed. This is now being incorporated into the specifications. The accuracies that we have there, happy for people to comment on whether they are too high, too low, or otherwise. So once at the completion of all of these forums, all of the documents will be finalized and they will be put out to the industry for comment, for everybody to comment on. And I'm particularly interested in the companies that are out in the field doing the engineering surveying and the field asset pickup as to how pragmatic those figures are. Or, for example, the horizontal accuracy. No, George, 0.1 of a meter is way too high. Or no, look, it should be 0.25 of a meter, or whatever the case might be. And similarly for vertical measurements for reduced levels, invert levels, and the like. Typically, the precision for measurement is in meters, two decimal places. The only exception is where we have eastings and northings, where we go to 3 decimal places. As part of the data governance, we are in constant conversations about how do we know that what's been built follows the design or is varied from the design. And we know that many organizations have their construction supervisors that go out on site. We also acknowledge that they're not able to go out on site all of the time. And in fact, there's one client that we know that has stipulated to us that, George, we don't really worry about anything that's under 450 diameter as a pipe. So we only focus on the larger side. So this scenario is sliced and diced in many ways. What we have now agreed to, following conversations with a number of clients and also consultants, is that this form is to be supplied with every submission to show the variations that have been agreed to. Actually, I'll rephrase that. This is to be completed to show the variations. The comments field indicates whether it's been agreed to or not. Now, all things being equal, there will be a similar document that the asset owner has from their their interaction with a consultant during the construction process. And that way, that can be married up. The value of this document is that once it's submitted in a digital form, it can then be used for the people that are doing the data validations and the data corrections as a way to verify that the data they've received actually exists and all of the variations have been taken into account. Otherwise, we know from talking to the asset management teams that they're given a set of data to validate, and all they can do is validate it on face value. If they're not provided with any details about any of the changes, then they can't make any comment back to the engineering teams to say to them whether there's any discrepancies with the data or not. The only other way to do it is for them to pore over the design drawings that have been issued for construction. And that's a time-consuming process. In time, we anticipate that receiving these digitally will then be able to be used as part of the validation and correction process going forward. So I know through, Open Spatial with their AC/DC platform, they're always considering this. The GDV hub that Gaby is going to talk a little bit about is also considering this. It will really make a difference. Last year, we provided the details of the proposed changes and have been working with the feedback received. So as I said, following this year's forums, we'll finalise the documents and distribute for comment. Now, we've got the head there with the cog. What that's indicating is that at the end of this proposed changes session, we're going to ask you what your preferred phase-in period is going to be. Now, when Kelly launches the poll, you'll see that there's already a number of responses to it. So what we're doing with our polls this year, which we weren't able to do over the last couple of years, is have cumulative responses. If you've already responded because you attended a forum, last week's forum, that's okay. Feel free to respond again or not respond. We'll leave it up to you. But you'll see from what you see in the poll that there's a very definite focus about the time frame for the phase-in period. With the GDA shift, we're all in the swing of the GDA shift, either to 2020 or the ATRF 2014. And I'll put a statement in there about ICM, and their focus is to know your data. To know your data is to know it through your datum. And so there's a lot of information that they recommend that you capture as part of the metadata about the method and the parameters that you use. Now, the way that we've addressed that, and I'll go through this, is that there's a notes field. You can always put comments in there. Now, the date submitted and the construction date is always very important. And I'll just go back a bit. So if you're using GDA 2020 and you record the date submitted and the construction date, no problem. You've got the coordinate datum recorded there. However, if you're going to use ATRF 2014, then it's really important that other information is gathered, and there's two critical things that need to be collected, as many of you who are surveyors would know, and that's the start date of the observation, so the start date of the measurements, and the end date of the measurements. Now, because the ATRF is a dynamic datum, that will provide enough information to be able to do that transformation process to what if you're using ATRF. If you're using GDA 2020, you don't necessarily need to record that information, but feel free to populate it. Now, there's a poll for this. Kelly, have you launched that particular poll?
Sorry, give me 1 second.
Yes.
Here it is.
Thank you.
Okay. So that's up. Can you see it, George?
No, I can't. I'm in presentation mode, so
It's
so
popped
I'm
up
not
on my
I'm
screen,
seeing.
but
Okay.
it's also in the chat.
Okay, great. Yes, I don't want to mess with my screens at the moment in case something goes awry. So whilst people are continuing with that, I'll just move on to that. And you're leaving the polls open until the end of the forum. Is that the scenario, Kelly?
Yes, all the polls will stay open till the end.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Now, last year, we created a set of cut-down documents that only outline the changes. So you'll see under 1.3.1, there's nothing highlighted there. There's no change. Under 1.3.2, there's a key informational change, and we list what that is. That table shows you the changes. So the intention was at a glance, you could see where those changes are and what they are. And as per our process, yellow for new, blue for text that we are removing. So we have another poll here, which Kelly is about to launch. And what we'd like to know is, do you want to see that document? Are you okay with just the full document because the same changes will be highlighted there? Are you happy either way? We just really want to get some guidance there so that we know what our team needs to take into account when we're preparing these documents. This next section has been, a really important section because there's a lot of questions that come to us, and we want to make sure that we can communicate that as much as possible during the forums. We respond to the people that send us through a question. So every question is important. Don't worry about whether you think it's minor or not. If it's important to what you need to do, then that's the only thing that needs to be taken into account. So I've got the next couple of slides are about different community requests. So I'll start with this one. Making sure that all assets are within the area of work extent. In the current process, the only way that the asset owners can process what the project information with the asset data is by using the area of work extent boundary. And what we're finding is that there are instances where assets overlap the boundary, are outside of the boundary isn't adjusted for it. And so there's a lot of time and effort that's spent on creating these precise boundaries to encompass all these assets. So now what's been agreed to is that we would include an area of work extent identifier as an attribute that will be applied in every single table. So when you create the area work extent boundary, it will have an ID, and that ID will be populated with every table. And that way there's no, yes, Kelly?
Quick question, did you want me to put that poll about the phase-in time up?
Not just yet, Kelly. I'll let you know.
Sorry, I thought I missed it. Okay, keep going.
No, thanks for speaking up. So that's what we're dealing with. We're going to create an area work extent boundary.
Excuse me.
Yes.
This is Arthur. If I select yes, will that be for cut down documents or full document?
What?
From the poll.
From the poll?
Yeah.
I don't have the poll in front of me. What's the question? Do you want to see the cut down documents?
If I select yes, will that be yes for cut down
Correct.
documents or
yes,
full document?
Yes, for the cut down document.
There's two questions there, so I don't know which.
Yeah, I agree. The wording was a bit vague there.
Yeah.
It's just ambiguous.
There's two questions there. So if you select yes, it's either full or cut down. Sorry.
Okay. Let's have a look.
Just assume that no meant we do want the full document.
Yes, that's correct. So I will fix it for next time. Thanks for highlighting that. So yes means yes to a full document.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Kelly. Similarly, as with the bioretention swale linear buffer strip, so we've shortened that to OSDS linear WSUD systems, and the same with sumps, basins, swales. We've shortened that to OSDS area, so that there is no confusion about that. And that's reflected in the changes of the documents. We've removed unnecessary attributes from PITs, such as the base RL and the access diameter. We've actually updated the diagrams as well. So we've got some more, some nicer looking diagrams, and also they're labeled according to where the attributes go to. We had some ambiguities with the last one about, depth to invert and base RL and those sorts of things. All of those have been tidied up and now are much clearer to follow. There are some diagrams that we've such as the PIT diagrams, that we've updated to better reflect the requirements. And so I want to talk a little bit about information supply and expectations from councils. That came up as a request, as a conversation. I spoke about that earlier about variations. And
George?
Yes, Kelly?
There's just a question about the chat. In the chat from Matthew, can the theme or layer structure universal file name be added to the top of the data attribute tables?
Yes, it can be. Okay. We'll take note of that. Thanks, Matthew. So getting back to information supply and expectations from councils, I covered that off a little bit earlier where I spoke about the variations to what is required. If anyone else has any other comments that they want to make, whether an asset owner or a data supplier, please don't hesitate to put it into the chat. And if it comes up, we'll cover it. Otherwise, I'll move on to the next point. Dealing with BIM and Revit compliance. Gaby is going to has a session on that in his technical side of things. But I do want to cover off a little bit about BIM and Revit. So as we all know, BIM is a process that's able to encompass a whole lot of disparate data sets and processes for design, for planning, design and construction requirements. One of the things around Revit, and I'll use that as an example, is that we have different kinds of classification systems that are used by architects, by engineers, by other professionals, and such as Uniclass, Omniclass, industry foundation classes, IFCs, and we know that these will be used according to what the project base is. And in Victoria, VDAS is endeavouring to align those processes so that there's exchange of information. Now, how does that fit in with the asset management realm? Well, if we look at A-SPEC, and this is what Gaby will show you, from our perspective, it really doesn't make any difference what classification system you want to use. What's really important is the classification system going to be able to contain the data that's needed to be extracted, to be used from an asset management perspective? And this is where A-SPEC is used as a funnel. And what Gaby will show you is schedules that can be created, that can be automatically populated to comply with the A-SPEC requirements. So in effect, we've got our 3D environment in the 3D drawing, and we've got the asset management requirements from an inventory perspective being supplied by satisfying the A-SPEC requirement. And we heard, so last week during our D-Spec forum, we heard representative from Melbourne Water talk about identifying their Uniclass requirements for their particular assets. We'll be having further discussions with Melbourne Water and others who are using that, and we'll be guided by them as to what we need to take into account to make sure that A-SPEC will deliver what's required. So these are some other points that were raised from people who registered. So I'm going to deal with these one at a time. Onboarding for contractors. We've got a process, and the process is that people go onto the A-SPEC website, they complete a contact form, and typically they request access to the specifications. Our process is then to respond to that and request that they sign a non-disclosure agreement, and also let us know who they are going to be delivering data to. And it's important that we understand that, because there are some instances, we've had two scenarios over the past couple of years, instances where councils have been requesting A-SPEC data but have not subscribed to it, and instances where consultants have wanted to use the A-SPEC structure to deliver to a client outside of the local government or water authority space. In the first scenario, there is no requirement for you as a consultant to deliver A-SPEC related data to an organisation that's not a subscriber. Obviously, we want them to be a subscriber, and we'll follow up with you to find out a contact and request that. And that's happened recently with a couple of councils in WA, and they are, and one of them has become a member, another one is about to become a member. So we can see that there's quite a bit of value in what A-SPEC offers. The second scenario, if a consultant wants to use it for another sector, the first thing that we ask is to have a conversation with us, and we'll talk about what the requirements are, and what the commercial arrangements would be. So case-by-case scenario, but both of those situations are able to be dealt with. Omission of existing assets from submissions. We've seen a lot of instances, and this has been raised again by council, that data submissions, subdivision data submissions, are also providing details about the existing assets. Our recommendation is that whilst you may provide the location of the asset, you do not provide any details about that unless the asset owner wants you to. It needs to be marked that it's an existing asset, and typically we have a prefix EX. So if there's a pit number 1, then if it's an existing asset, it would be EX1. That way, all of those assets can be filtered out. Your choice as to whether you provide further detail about those assets or not. Data formats. Typically, we're seeing 3 kind of data formats for the delivery. We're not considering A-SPEC a data format. A-SPEC is a standard specification. It's a data structure. Data format, when we talk about data formats, we talk about data exchange format, such as MIF-MID, or a MapInfo native format, which is a tab file, or the Esri data exchange format, which is shape, or the OGC format that they advocate, which is GeoPackage.
GeoPackage.
Thanks, Gaby. I got to it in the end. and so they are typically the 3 formats that we see. And we know from our experience over the years that with MIF-MID and shape, they're in the public domain. Consultants can access those to see what they need to do to create an extract from that. And now with GeoPackage, similar scenario. All systems that we know of, all platforms can create and read GeoPackage files. So we would strongly recommend that you move to GeoPackage because it's a simpler process. Asset handover standards. Yes, that came up in the conversation, and I covered it a little bit earlier. Along with that form, we also have a document for as constructed data submissions, which can be tailored to every organization. And if you're interested in having a look at that as constructed submission document or work as executed submission document, please let us know. We have one that incorporates requirements including A-SPEC and AC/DC. We're developing one for A-SPEC and the GDV hub, and we have one where it's only A-SPEC. So if you need us to do some work on it, yes, there will be a cost to it, but we're happy to give it to you as a template if you want to then modify it to suit your needs. Please send us an email or put in the chat if you'd like some more information about that. Digital twins and digital engineering came up as a topic, and I asked the person that suggested this, and the response was, you know, we're really in amongst a highly digital environment, and so when we're talking digital twins and digital engineering, the question is there anything else that A-SPEC needs to take into account to satisfy the digital engineering needs and the digital twin needs? Now, from a technical perspective, we're making our own assessment about how to be able to use A-SPEC as the foundation of the data. But so if we're doing that, then what else can we hold in the A-SPEC environment that enhances the foundation of that data, that creates the certainty and the confidence and the completeness of the accuracy of the data? We require your feedback on that. Please do not hesitate to send us through an email with a detailed explanation or bullet points. Please email us at info@gisa.com.au, or if you have a couple of bullet points, don't hesitate to put them into the chat. Council's expectations. Again, this has come up, but I want to tackle it from a slightly different perspective. The council's expectations are that the consultant complies fully with the specifications, and if they have any questions, they take whatever actions they need to resolve those questions before the data is submitted. And that may be that you contact the asset management team within council that is going to be handling the data, or you contact GISA to resolve any questions that you may have. And I'm going to give you some examples of some of the things that come through. There are no new asset classes. This across the spectrum of the specifications, the number of new asset classes can be counted on one hand. So there isn't a major change from that perspective. And it probably shows a couple of things for us, particularly with D-SpecDiscussion, A-SPEC and O-SPEC. There is a level of maturity that is showing that there's very little to create there. The other specs, they're evolving. They haven't been in the marketplace as long. They haven't been utilised as long. They haven't got as big a user base as D, R and O. So as we bring on new clients, then we find out where the gaps are, and then we deal with the gaps. But what we will be doing is talking to Melbourne Water around how they capture their basins, because this requirement has been in the specs right from the very start, particularly D-Spec. So we're looking at, is there a way that we can simplify the capture of this? Attributes. Primary change, area works identifier, as I mentioned, and there are instances where we found some asset tables didn't have a unique identifier, which made it difficult to differentiate between each of the assets that were recorded. So we've added a unique identifier field to be populated. We've removed attributes from a couple of tables. We've added other attributes to those three tables that you can see.
Excuse me, George.
Yes.
There's a comment in there which you should read from regarding emission of existing assets.
Okay, I haven't got access to that at the moment, Kelly.
Okay, I'll tell you what it is. Emission of
okay.
existing assets from submission. Is it important for us to know if there are any changes happening for existing assets to reflect in AMIS? For example, SEP PIT is changing to GSEP.
Agreed. Yes. Thank you for outlining that. In that scenario, it's an existing asset, but there's work done on it. So for us, what we would recommend is that it's recorded as a new asset, particularly as the type has changed, and put a comment in the field. A comment in the comment field.
Thanks.
Can we keep it as it is, like without changing? Sorry, George. Like, is there any requirement that we have to include that, like omission of existing asset from submission, or can we keep it as it is, how we are receiving now?
Well, if how you're receiving it now is the only thing that that was commented to me was that if it's an existing asset, it needs to be marked as an existing asset. If it's an existing asset that's had some work on it, then it needs to be recorded that it's an existing asset that had some work on it. The asset officer that sent me this request to talk about omission of existing assets was not to have the existing assets such that they were seen as new assets, and therefore would not create a duplication in the asset management system, a duplication of valuations, a duplication, of a record. So if what you're getting is working for you, then just keep doing it.
So the changes which are implemented now will be circulated throughout all the contractors, and we receive the changes as you have proposed here, or it is different for each council?
No, it's not different for every council. It's the same for every council. Whatever is proposed here will be circulated. If you want to talk more about this, I'm happy to take it offline just to make sure that your requirements are actually addressed.
Yep, that point, I think it's affecting a little bit, like it's a big scenario in our system. So I would like to talk about it later on here.
Sure.
Thank you, George.
Yeah, feel free to send me an email and we'll arrange a time to talk about it.
Thank you.
Okay. I brought this up last year, and this is a really good example of rock beaching in two types. So we've got diagram A and diagram B, and in diagram A we have the OSDS area and its lining material, and if it's OSDS linear, it's drainage liner. So that's how it's to be recorded. Whereas with a head wall, we have a new attribute called erosion protection, and it's yes, no. And what we recommend is that you put a comment in the, take a photo and put a comment in the comment field as to what the erosion protection is. This is the source codes. There are certain codes that are only applicable for existing assets. For new assets, we're focusing on as constructed information. So therefore, some of those fields are not likely to be relevant for new assets. I apologize, the field note will be. That's a typo. That's a typo on my part, but we're differentiating between what you can capture post-process and what needs to be captured during the construction phase. There's two new code lists, jointing method and pit lid type, a pit lid material, just to, again, to put some structure around what we're capturing. And we're always looking at clarifying our codes. So, for example, we're endeavoring not to have great as a function. There may be a dual function, to the pit, but we're endeavoring to, have the pit defined by whether it's a junction pit or a side entry pit and the like. So we're always looking at clarifying those. We've rejigged our code list, so you'll see a little bit more detail in that. We've clarified things in our code. We had a weir pit where we highlighted the weir on the right-hand side, which is inaccurate. So we've removed that drawing and we've actually put in a correct drawing, which is the one on the left. So this came up as a question, and I wanted to bring it up again. And thank you again for all the consultants that send us through these questions. This was an interesting one. How do we record a core belt pit? And so our recommendation was record it as a junction pit and put core build in the comments field, as was suggested by the consultant. In this scenario, we came up with, we were presented this scenario where there was a property connection and there was a pit at the end of it. Our advice was to capture it as a property inlet pit. Now, whether it gets presented to the council or not will be determined as whether it's determined to be a council asset or not. And that still comes back to a conversation with the council as to whether they want to receive that information. We're seeing new types, new feature types all the time. We brought this in last year and we're just reinforcing this as an example of the kind of information that we put into the pit code. So this is now a pit code. Now you can run that poll, Kelly. What is the preferred phase-in time for adoption of the changes? Now
so that is running, George.
Yeah, thank you. How am I going time-wise, Kelly?
It's 10:58.
Uh-huh.
I'll let you know. I'll just pull up the agenda.
Okay. As we can see from that poll, the preference is a 6-month lead-in time. So so we'll continue running these polls each session. Code list APIs. Here's another poll. We've spoken about code lists. There's 3 ways to access them. Gaby's going to talk about it. We're continuing to do harmonization and standardization of our codes, as I mentioned. I won't say any more about that. Kelly will run a poll in the background to see if you'd like to get access to the API and the web app. I have a video here, which is a dynamic simulation. And so this is part of future-proofing, and this is why. So I'm going to run that. Okay, now part of the reason that I showed that was to give you an indication of the kind of dynamic simulation that's being done. Now, that's not a visualization, that's actual software being used with physics engines behind the scenes, you know, database of 100,000 different types of trees and their tree root systems. Now, that kind of thing has more impact when we know with certainty what kind of data we have. So that's why I wanted to show that to you. Now I'm just going to skip through a couple of slides. Oh, don't need that. And I want to show you this. Oh. Can everybody see the water renewal forecast slide? Okay. Now, one of our clients, when we did some work in New Zealand, had a requirement to do a 30-year renewal forecast. And they could only do that once they started collecting data about their assets. So if I run this program, particularly for predictive modeling and the like, I know that there are some asset management systems that do this, but this is probably the most sophisticated one I've seen, where it actually shows on the left-hand side the changing condition of the, I've used wastewater system here, but if you can imagine that what it's like with other systems. So criticality, use, growth, all of these factors have been built into it to be able to do this kind of modeling. And as you can see over time, the asset manager strategically can identify what dollars can be spent each year. Now, that's why we do what we do, to make sure that these kind of interactions can be had with the assets. So that's the last thing that I wanted to leave you with. Thank you very much for your time. I'm now going to hand it over to Gaby. Tech Talk with Gaby. Over to you, Gaby.
Thank you, George. Right. And I'm just going to share my screen. Yeah, carry on, George.
You do that, Gaby. I was just going to say, with the current poll about do you want to use the API code list, for everybody that has said need more information, please put in the chat or email us so that we know what you request. Thanks, Gaby. I'll go silent now.
All right. Okay. Just want to get myself properly organized. All right. So I'll be talking about spatial relationships, the code list discussion, and then I'll have a Revit discussion as well. So first of all, let's just talk about spatial relationships. I talked about this at the B-Spec one, but it's important for everybody that when you do validations, that you understand that embedded in the specs are a number of relationships that when we do validations, then we test for those relationships. We want to make sure that the different spatial entities that is submitted, they actually comply with the spec in terms of how they are positioned in relation to others. So the different kinds of relationships that we are checking for is something like inside is one thing inside another. Covers and cross is something covering something else, or is it crossing? Disjoint, meaning that two things are actually not touching and not covering each other. Touching, they're actually touching, and then start and end point relationships. And there's a bunch of qualifiers that I've got over there. I want to open up, come on. I'll just, for some reason, my link stopped working, and it was working earlier on. Okay, so, and this is again an old file. People, apologies. I just need to get the correct file here. It looks like my network is giving me hassles.
So perhaps while Gabby's getting his network sorted out, I'll just float a couple more polls while we wait, just so we can gauge how we're doing in relation to delivering the information, and are you getting what you want, so that we can continue to refine these forums and make sure that they stay relevant. So the first one is asking about how relevant was the content of the forum. So if you could let us know if it's relevant to you. And the other thing that we're thinking of doing is we're thinking of opening up a communication platform. So the platform is to facilitate casual conversations and shared experiences amongst the A-SPEC community. And I'm just curious as to whether that's something that you would use and you would be interested in using. And if so, what I will do is I'll put a link in the chat, and if you could just fill out your name and email with that link, then I'll be able to contact you once that forum is up and running. So you know, it'll we kind of just want to give you a space to come together. Maybe we'll run some lunch and learns through that, or you can have your own sort of user groups, or you can run some lunch and learns in terms of exchanging information. So I'll pop that link. Are you ready, Gabby? It looks like you are.
I'm not really. I've lost my D-Spec file, but I'll use the other file. I can't get access to it now, so I'll have to see what's going on. I'm just going to talk through the B-Spec part and explain what we're doing, and I will endeavor to share the D-Spec element with everybody. So what we've done is we've developed a set of relationships that we work with when we do data validation. So, and I'm going to just explain some of this to you. Area extent in relation to other area extents, there shouldn't be a relationship. But if I look at building footprints, then in relation to other building footprints, there should be a disjoint. What does it mean? It means that I cannot have two buildings that actually overlap one another or touch one another. The building footprints should be disjoint. They should not touch. When something is a touch, then obviously that's an easy one to understand. And this matrix, what it allows you to do, it allows you to do a spatial validation in terms of your spatial entities, and how they should work in relation to others. And we've got the same for D-Spec. And I'll just talk about the D-Spec ones. Where people might make mistakes with D-Spec is when you have head-end walls and pits, these should never overlap. They should always be disjoint. And that's kind of normal, but we have had some where this was not the case, where they did overlap. So that's the one part. The other part of that is that the start and end nodes of a pipe must fall inside the head end wall or the pit polygon. So the start and end points must always be inside either a head end or a pit, and that's another spatial relationship that we check for. Now I just want to confirm, Kelly, can everybody see my screen, the spatial validation screen?
Yep.
Okay, all right. I'll just move on to the next bit. So the next bit is talking about code lists. So there was a few questions about code lists, and I'll just talk about this. We've actually developed a web application, and the web application has the data for all the code lists, and this is an application that we update on a regular basis. If you go to the Digital Hive website, sorry. If you go to the Digital Hive website and you go to the A-SPEC services, you go to online code list, you will find that there is a link to the application, and I'm going to activate that link now. So, and that will open me up, and it'll actually prompt me to log in. If you do not have a login, then on the website, you'll see that we've got a username and a password. So this is free access for anybody who wants to use this application. Now, not everything is available using this particular username and password. This is just a public, and I'll explain some of that. So once I've logged in, it'll take me to a small menu with 3 items: public code list, new code list request, and a list of requests. If I'm logged in as the general public and I go to new code list request, it will tell me that I cannot do this. You'll see it'll open the thing, but everything is in red, that little red mouse pointer tells me that I can't actually enter any data. And that's because I haven't got the rights to do so. If I'm interested in finding a code list, and it's more than that, it's not just finding a particular code list. This is a list of all the codes, and I can filter based on various things. I can either say, show me all the D-Spec ones. For instance, so if I go today my tech isn't working with me. The little cross is obscuring me, so I just ignore that. If I want to filter on something like status, there's the asset status, then I can get all the asset statuses. If I want to filter on a particular code, if I want to know what SEP stands for, maybe SEPT, then there it is, it's a septic tank. Or if I have a particular a particular item I want to be looking for, something like concrete, then I can get everything that contains concrete, and I can go and find the related code for that. Now, if I go back to the list of requests, this was actually, we developed this because there was a request from some of the users. And what this will allow you to do, it'll allow you, if you have access to the application, it'll allow you to submit a new query for a new code. So if you've got something that you want a new code, you're coming across this a lot, and you need a code, then you come to this and you can use the new code request to to request a new code. This is the list of requests by other people, and if I click on a particular one, then I can look at the details of that particular one. And so here is, I'm the one that submitted this. It's for A-SPEC, W-SPEC. You don't have to fill in everything else. You can fill in what you need. Give us a description, that's important. And the other part is you can attach as many photos as you like. And this will also work on your phone, so you can actually take a photo with your phone. And so if you wanted to have a code for a particular thing, so apologies for my ugly tank, but I wanted to use that as an example. You can take a photo of the asset for which you need a code, and submit that, and that submission will get to George, and George will deal with it from there. Okay, so just as a summary, this public code list is available for everybody. You can get access to it by logging in using this username and password. Okay, and if there's any questions about that, please feel free to submit those. I hope I've answered the ones that was on there. Previously asked. Okay, I want to quickly talk about GDV Hub and the validation processes that we've got there. There's a new function, in terms of our validation process. Now, everybody, if you're not aware, GDV Hub is a joint venture between Digital Hive and One Spatial. And we've developed this online application to do validations. So something new that we've developed is something called autocorrections, and we will autocorrect certain spellings, cases, and data types. And what I've got now is a very short video that will show just a little bit about the autocorrections. So I'm just going to get that going. Now, Kelly, I didn't say share my sound when I started the presentation. How can I do that? Or is it not possible to add it afterwards?
If you just stop sharing and then share again, and before you click the full share, you say set share my sound.
Sorry, I'm messed up, I guess.
That's okay. So just go to reshare, and before you finalize the share, you click on that. That thing.
So
that should work now.
Okay.
There is no sound.
All right. Look, I'll talk through it. So what we're doing over here is loading a project and opening that. Once we've loaded, you can click the continue. That now uploads the submission to the portal, and you'll see that on the left-hand side we've got all the available asset classes, but I've swapped and now it's only the ones that have been uploaded that's shown, and you can see it's automatically mapped a few. We go and map the extras, and if there's a mistake, then you can go and correct those mistakes. Just go make sure that it's all good. Now that little symbol shows us that not everything has been mapped correctly, and so we can go in and correct the mapping. You can see there's a type X, which should be type, and there's unique ID X, which should be unique ID. So it will automatically try and map, and when it cannot map, it will allow you to fix the mapping. And you can now save the mapping. So if you have a particular way in which you normally work, and you have files that's in a particular structure, then you can upload those. And once you've done the mapping once, apply those, it will be stored and saved on your system. And the next time that you load, you won't have to do the mapping again. And so once it's all good, the testing will start, and shows you the progress as things are finishing, and then comes back, and you can now continue to review the results. Okay, all the tests have been completed. Now let's have a look at the corrected output report, and it shows me what was corrected. Let's just click on the report, generate the report. I'm going ahead of this. Okay. And so here you can see all the tests that have passed, and the process complete. And if there's any corrections that it had made, it would have highlighted those. All right, that's all about this one. Just get out of there. Okay, sorry. Right. For the next bit, I want to talk very quickly about BIM integration. We know that BIM is a methodology that people use to manage infrastructure of assets throughout the life cycle of the infrastructure. And a comment that we're making is that without good data, you cannot really manage your infrastructure. Asset management, in the same way, is really dependent on good and accurate data, and that's why A-SPEC is such an important player, and the same with GIS. Now, those are all important components for making things like digital twins work. The problem that we have is that a lot of these systems are they have their own way of working, and there isn't a way of bringing them to communicate with one another, and it's very difficult to update asset management systems with BIM information or with GIS, and so it's not so straightforward, especially when you're talking about the BIM environment. We believe that A-SPEC is a mechanism through which we can bring things together. So we've done a project in collaboration with an organization called the Educational Alliance, and so a great shout out to them for this. The goal that we have in this part of the project was to develop an A-SPEC based integration that will help us to enable the complete BIM process and link the BIM model to an asset management system, and we're doing that with Revit, and so we've built a little demonstrator. This is another video, and this one doesn't have sound, so it doesn't matter. I'll just talk through this one. So here we are inside a BIM model, or sorry, inside Revit, and before you do anything, you have to go and you've got to go and build what's known as shared parameter files. So we've got to get the shared parameter files created. So I've developed a little application through which we now just generate a generic shared parameters file. Go and save that, and that's what the shared parameters file looks like. Now that's a generic thing that works in Revit, but it's not linked to anything, and that's the next step. So here's one of the buildings that we worked with, and we've now opened up the building. And if you look at the building here, if we query any of the attributes or any of the assets in there, there's nothing in terms of A-SPEC that you can see. So no shared parameters, no attributes. In the next step, what we've done over here is to use the actual A-SPEC spreadsheets, and I'm busy linking the building space asset classes. So I actually go and I use those spreadsheets, and we now use that to build. You see, this is just showing that there's nothing in the beginning, and then when we run our application, just want to run it very quick. So it reads the Excel spreadsheet, and we go and actually we have to, it's a quirky thing. We have to go and count all the attributes. We have to enter that and make sure that that's all selected. And we'll later on do the same for doors and windows. And once it's run, now you can see all those attributes are now available inside Revit. And if we query on anything, those attributes are there. And at this point, if you wanted to enter data, you could do so. And there's also just quickly going through the process of adding it to the doors and windows. And run that, and that should be, and it's the same sort of process. Once you set it all up, you then have to go and enter these. Now you have to go through the process of actually marrying up or making those attributes available within the Revit environment, and you get them available then. All right. Now, the next part is that we now have to match within Revit. There's a lot of attributes, and a lot of them may marry with the A-SPEC ones, but not all of them. And so we've got to go and do a mapping. So we get all those attributes together, map them all together, and go and extract data. Now I've just done a few there, but there's a lot more that we could do, and we're now exporting the Revit data into an Excel spreadsheet. This is just a normal export, and then opening it up in Excel, and there you have the same data that was in Revit. You now have in Excel, and with all the data that was there. So if we edit some data, I just added a little bit of data just to show edits outside in Excel. We can now we just copy and paste, put some data, some rubbish data in just to illustrate the point. If we go back to Revit in a minute, in a second, then we can see that some of that data, the data initially isn't loaded, but what we're now going to do is we're now going to actually build a link between that Excel data set and this Revit model. All right. And there's the data. So just want to get the exact name of that tab, and run it in the Excel in the Revit model. And so there's the data back. And so now I've read the data, and that data is available inside Revit. And what we now can do is we can now go and edit, and we basically can actually set it up so that we edit in either the Excel, or we can edit in Revit. and then exchange the data backwards and forwards. And initially you have to do that manually, but there is a way in which you can permanently link them so that once you make changes in the one environment, those changes are reflected in the other environment. And you see that you'll see that what I'm trying to do then now is just making the changes outside, and the moment I go back into Revit, you'll see it has updated those changed data elements. And I'm going to stop it right there. The important thing here is that what we tried to do was to prove that we can build an application that uses the A-SPEC attribution and builds a permanent model that can be updated externally. So that could be inside your asset management system or internally inside the model, and the two are in sync and we can keep them in sync. All right. Apologies for my
Gaby,
tech issues.
You've still got 10 more minutes if you want to show something, or
no,
you're okay. Done?
Yeah, what I'd like to do is open it up for some questions. Is there anybody with a question?
Great. Will this presentation be available? Well, the recording will be available, yes.
And I'll make sure that that the video and everything else works properly. The Excel that didn't work initially.
Okay, then if nobody has any questions, then George, I'd like to hand back to you. Oh, hang on, here's a question for you, Gaby. Do you know a good place to get Dynamo training? Dynamo.
Good Dynamo. I do indeed. Perhaps that's a segue. My son is an architect, and he's trained me everything I know about Dynamo, and he knows a lot more. But he does offer Dynamo training. If you're interested, I can talk to him. Other than him, I have nobody else that I know about. But he's good enough. Okay. Vishal, you have your hand up.
No, I think it's hands down now. So over to you, George.
Mute. I didn't realise.
Sorry.
Sorry, I was on mute. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Hi. My question is in regards to when data is being collected in the field. Now, it is not mentioned how the data is being collected, whether it's using GNSS all the way, or it is a combination of GNSS and total station, using survey control mark, and so on. So I believe most of the data are collected in GDA 94. So at some point we will need to transform that into a GDA 2020. And I think we need to know how the data was collected to be able to use the correct grid for the transformation.
I'll comment on that. If you do an A-SPEC submission, one of the things that you have to do in the README file is to state what is the mechanism, what is the data submitted as. So if it's MGA 55, then you have to specify what you've submitted, what spatial reference you've submitted. Now, you've also got to say how you collected the data and what was the transformation process. So that's all captured in the A-SPEC area of works, as well as in the README. And so I think the answer to your question is that's part of the spec. The spec specifies that you have to submit that information. Matthew?
If you're collecting it in a grid system, it doesn't matter if you're using a total station or a GPS, because they all should scale to that grid system.
Yeah.
So, yeah, all good.
Right. There were other hands. Okay.
It's regarding, this is Swapna. I don't know if it is relevant with yours, Gaby, but it's regarding the PIT schedule that we receive in ASCON drawings. And we need to validate that PIT schedule with the data we receive from the D-SpecDiscussion data. And
Yeah.
it's quite difficult to match what's in the PDF with the digital data we receive. So there is no, it is a very manual process in checking whether we get all the data correct with the PIT types and their attributes with the D-Spec. So I'm wondering how everyone are dealing with this, and is it been any part in the validation of these attributes?
I'll give an answer, but I think that George will want to add something afterwards. So I think my first question to you is, what did you specify for people to provide? Are they providing the data as GIS ready data formats? So if you're only getting PDFs, then I agree with you. Then mapping the schedules from the PDF, that would be hard. But what you should do is you should go back to the developers and specify that you want the data in a GIS ready format, which means that the people who are actually doing the pickup in the field are the ones who are marrying the attribution to a particular asset, and that means that takes the guesswork out for you, and you can use schedules just to validate.
We do receive it in D-Spec in digital format, but sometimes ASCON drawing speaks different from what we get in the D-Spec, especially in the PIT attributes like PIT types and all. But we usually refer, like, check against the ASCON drawings with the PIT schedule. So that is where I'm having an issue. Yeah.
I want to suggest that we take this offline. We have a chat about it offline.
All right. Yeah.
But George, maybe do you want to make an extra comment? Because looking at you, I thought, George I know you.
Well, look, it's really got to have a look at the scenario. So this comes back to what we spoke about earlier about the changes from design to construction, right? So if there's going to be a record of what's been changed, then that's what you spend your time on. You're looking at the exceptions to the rule, not ticking off every single thing that's in the design drawing. If you want to save yourself time, then look at the process of your handover and what is requested, what is provided, and if it's not, and also look at your internal processes as well from your subdivision development team as to whether they're recording changes. Now, Swapna, which team, you're an assets data officer, GIS officer?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
You're at Wyndham, aren't you?
Yeah, Wyndham Council, yes.
Are you working in Tony's area?
Yes.
Okay, now, all of that should be done by the subdivision development team, what you're talking about, not you. Your role is to check the data. It's not to check that what's been designed has been built. Your role is to validate what's been designed has been built. So it's a different scenario to what you're actually talking about. So let's take it offline if you're okay with that, and we'll have a talk about what your process is, and then probably involve Tony in that conversation to see if there's some tweaking to be done internally.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Sounds good. Thank you.
You're welcome. I just saw a comment, Vishal, about pits are collected as polygons and points. Okay. The requirement in D-Spec is to collect the pits as polygons. If somebody wants to give you points, that's okay, but the requirement is polygons. When we're validating data on behalf of clients and someone sends us points, we send it back to them. Because there are two issues that occur with points. One is there is the potential that you change the alignment of a pipe segment if you're joining point to point. Because within the D-Spec requirement, the pipe segment goes from edge of pit to edge of pit, and therefore it's not center of pit to center of pit. You then draw a line from the edge of the pit by adding a vertex to a common intersection in the pit itself. I'm happy to have a conversation with you offline about that, but I might just bring up the D-Spec document and show you the example that we have there. Did
George,
you want
while
to
you're
take
doing
yourself
that,
off mute? Yes.
While you're doing that, George.
Yes, fire away.
Just a comment to that. I agree with the idea of polygons, but I would think that a lot of agencies internally would then post-process that into a point for scaling issues. So that the point thing I think is useful, but it's likely to be derived, not be a primary capture thing.
True. We see that a lot, Milosh, as you know, we see that a lot depending on the kind of GIS software that people use. Makes no difference to me. If you want to use points, but from a dial before you dig perspective, a point will not give you the extent of the asset. Now, if you want to use a point and transfer all the attributes across to it, do it. And as you've suggested, Milosh, it's a post-processing exercise. That's when I would do it, to make sure that all the attributes are across, but then use the polygon as a graphic to show the extent of the attribute, the extent of the asset. And I'm just going to share my screen now to demonstrate that what I've spoken about. Can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. So what we're saying is let's take this scenario here, these two scenarios, irregular shaped pits. Okay, the pipe comes to the edge. This one just happens to go right through, but in this scenario, the pipe comes to the edge. I'll zoom in a bit because it's grayed out. The pipe comes to the edge, a vertex is added, and then it connects to a common point. If you want to put a point there, that's fine. But from a dial before you dig perspective, it's not going to satisfy knowing the extent of the asset, and it's likely to cause an instance where there's an asset that's compromised because of some road opening somewhere. So this is why we specify a polygon, the true orientation and the true dimensions. Any other questions around that? Vishal, did that answer? Were you asking whether it should be polygons or points, or are you just making a statement?
No, thank you. You did answer some, actually clarify some some issues that I didn't think of. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. Okay. Well, I may go into the wrap up then. And look, feel free to bring in some more questions. We usually go through the wrap up fairly quickly. Now, at the moment, you're probably seeing the A-SPEC website. Is that what you're seeing, Kelly?
Yep.
Great. Okay. The reason I bring this up is that we've spoken about these proposed documents. Now, in the initial instance, we sent out the documents to only the members of the community that subscribe to the specs, so that they would have first view of the changes. Now, if you type in proposed changes here in the box, and then look at the proposed changes, it will take you to the list of all of the documents here. Now, there are some documents that you don't need a login to access, such as this overview document, such as the certification form template, which I forgot to mention, we've now created as a CSV file, so you can download that. So the preference or the recommendation is use this CSV file, and that came out of a request from the council. Actually came out of a request out of Wodonga Council. If you're here, Brandon, thank you very much. I think I saw your name before. Yep. Right, and the handover checklist, that's available. Don't need a login. No problem there. Now, when it comes to, say you want to download a D-Spec, you'll come up with this. You will need a login to access those documents. And you can only access if you are a subscriber to the specs, as in a financial subscriber. You will only get access to those specifications if your organization subscribes to those specifications. Typically, consultants have access to all, but if you don't, just send us just complete this contact form, and at the bottom, just say what you'd like to get access to, and then Natalie from our office will address that and send you an update with now that you've got access. So I'll start off with proposed release dates for the phase-in period proposed release dates. We are proposing that the documents will be completed by the end of this calendar year. So essentially 1st of January or the first week in January, they will be available. Now, the phase-in period is really important because we recognize that everybody will need to take into account the changes, whether minor or major. You know, we've got some new asset classes across different specifications. I think we've got 5 altogether. And we've got new attributes, we've got some attributes removed. The codes are neither here nor there, right? Because they're dynamic, they're changing all the time. But based on the polls that we've seen over the last 2 weeks, the preferred time is 6 months. No problem. So what would happen is that when we publish the documents, we will also publish what the phase-in period will be. So let's say it's 6 months and the documents are published at the beginning of next year. Then from the 1st of July 2023, all submissions will need to include the new specifications, the new requirements of the newly published specifications. If you have any questions, just put them into the chat, and we'll deal with that during this session. in relation to code lists, as Gaby mentioned, there's a code list web app and an API. He's just migrated them to another platform, so they are now available. So how do people register? There's a link that Kelly put into the chat. If you haven't got access to the chat, please send us an email through info@gisa.com.au and we'll send you a link to that. And Gaby will deal with providing you with access. Now, there is a cost to utilizing the web app and the API, and it's a nominal cost. And so anyone attending this forum, whether you're an organization or an individual, there will be a free trial provided until the end of December 2022. Following that, there'll be a nominal cost of $215 plus GST per annum.
And George, I had a question that was whether this is a per seat license or whether it's an organizational license. Perhaps you want to say something about that?
Organizational, isn't it, Gaby?
Yeah.
Phew. I'm glad we got that in sync. Yes, so organizational license, right? So if you're a small business and you're an individual, then it's still your organization. If you bring on more people, they'll still get access to it. You just need to be in communication with Digital Hive so they can register that person's, is it via email address that they get access, Gaby? Yep. Yes, so Digital Hive is responsible for that. For subscribers to the specifications, this will be included in your next renewal, and there'll be an incremental cost to that. We're moving down this path with all of our specs, and over time we will transition. We'll still have the manuals because they're really valuable, but we will transition.
So George,
yes.
just on the API subscribe,
Yes.
I've just reposted the poll for the API code list in the chat. If you answer yes to the poll, that's all you need to do, because I've set this one up to automatically record your name, and I will then be in touch with you about getting you organised and set up with the API. If you need more information, again, I will know that you've clicked that and I will reach out to you and ask you what it is that you need from us and provide you with the information that you need.
Yep.
That's it.
Thanks. Thank you for that. And look, we've had the, I'm not sure that he's on at the moment, but Andre Makika was on from One Spatial earlier. If you're still on and under a guest name, Andre, just raise your hand. But Digital Hive and One Spatial are making the GDV hub available for trial at no cost until the end of this year as well. And so that will be available in the next couple of weeks for D and A-SPEC, and then there'll be a focus on the other specs after that. So, and their intention is that you also become part of the beta testing process and provide them with feedback. Next forum, next week. Same time, same back channel, as they say, 7th of September. And, you know, if you haven't registered, please register for the A-SPEC forum. The structure is the same. We will endeavour to go through as much as we can. And, you know, we're still focusing on being able to show to you what we're future-proofing and why, and continue the relevance of the specifications by receiving your feedback and having them be constantly improved if they need to be.
Excuse me, George. I've also just put up a quick poll around the trial for the GDV hub. So
Okay.
similar to the API, if you are interested, just select yes, and I will reach out to you and with more information about that.
Thanks, Kelly.
Pleasure.
All right, so that just leads us to thank you. Thank you to everybody who has come online today. We always get a lot of interest and a lot of conversation happening. Thank you for your contributions. Thank you for doing whatever you needed to do to get online. And I know that a number of people were in and out. Appreciate you doing that and setting aside the time. I will be here for the next 15 minutes and to answer any other questions, any other points that you want to cover off that we didn't cover off. Feel free to stick around with us. But on that note, on behalf of our team, thank you very much, and wishing you a beautiful rest of the day. Thanks, everyone.
See you, everyone. Sun is shining in Melbourne, so if you're in Melbourne, get out there. A good walk.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
You're welcome.
Thanks.